So the Nigeria Immigration Service, in collaboration with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, has unveiled an observatory report on smuggling of migrants aimed at unraveling the dynamics of smuggling of migrant activities from, through, and to Nigeria between 2019 and 2021. The report indicates that 75% of Nigerians on the move plan to use migrant smugglers or travel facilitators when they were preparing for their journey, as compared to 21% who had not planned to do so. On gender profiling of migrant smugglers, the report stated that 78% are men, 19% are women, and 3% both. The report is aimed at understanding and addressing the unfolding migratory realities in Nigeria and the West African sub-region. The research work also revealed that cases of migrant smuggling in the country has been on a decline since 2018. Well, joining us in the studio or rather via Zoom, is the coordinator, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Observatory on Smuggling of Migrants, Claire Haley, and then National Research Consultant with the UNODC, Dr. Adebusuyi Adeniro, joins us in the studio. Good morning, Claire. Good morning, Dr. Adeniro.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Thank
you.
All
right. Let me begin with you, Claire. Talk to us why it was necessary to have this report put together.
So at the UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, we're responsible for, among other crimes, for monitoring trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. With trafficking in persons, we have a strong database. We collect information and data on trafficking in persons. But with smuggling of migrants, it's different. So there's no country in the world really that systematically collects data to understand the phenomenon of smuggling of migrants. And so Nigeria is no different in that. So we take a different approach with the observatory, whereby we try to understand migrant smuggling by collecting the data that there is, looking at the literature that there is, but also by interviewing key stakeholders such as Nigeria Immigration Service, such as NAFTIP, civil society, and also doing interviews and surveys with people who have been smuggled themselves. And so this is the field research that Dr. Adeniran was involved in coordinating in order to go and interview people who have had this experience themselves in order to better understand it and therefore to better combat migrant smuggling and better protect the human rights of people who are smuggled.
Right.
All right. Well, Dr. Adeniran, I mean, for me, I would just like to simply ask, tell us about this report. How worried should we be? What do we have in it?
Thank you very much. Before I move on to responding to what you've said, I'd like to quickly present a background information that could be helpful.
All right.
I would like us to understand that first and foremost, migration in itself, it's not a wrong endeavor. In fact, if well managed, it should ordinarily facilitate the development process. Development process at micro level and macro level. But what we are looking at here is the procedure of being engaged in a country. Most of the migration engagements, cross-border, that Nigerians are involved, they are basically approached through a wrong, using a wrong perspective. And it has not been helpful for individuals and even the image of the country. That was the initial motivation for embarking on this investigation. And this investigation took place between 2019 and 2021. And the idea is just to track the trend, patterns, and incidences of irregular migration in the country, especially the version that utilizes smuggling. In other words, we have smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons being like twin, whereas one is rather voluntary engagement, that is smuggling of migrants. Individuals make themselves available to be smuggled, whereas when we talk about trafficking in persons, it involves element of force. So the idea of the observatory is just to serve as a pool of information It should serve as a repository of data regarding migratory processes in the country. And when you look at what is the trend in the country, especially regarding the youth in the country, an average youth in Nigeria is desirous of leaving the country. But there could be approved ways of leaving the country, and there could be wrong ways of leaving the country. But majority or significant proportion of migratory engagements in the country presently falls within the category of unapproved. When I mention unapproved, I mean smuggling of migrants is regarded as a crime. Essentially a crime against the state because of the nitty-gritties involved in conducting these activities. You have deception being the basis of conducting smuggling of migrants. What is not obtainable, you claim that is obtainable. And in most of these cases, we have this process having implications for national security, for individual development, even for the image of the country. For instance, we have been able to detect that majority of Nigerians that are promised to be smuggled, they actually usually end up within the Sahara region.
But doesn't that speak to the fact that perhaps a lot of persons have not been perhaps aware, fully come to the understanding of the dangers involved in migration? We talk about creating awareness, we talk about educating people with regards to this. Perhaps that is a gap that we haven't filled properly.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. That is where the problem has been multiplied now in the country. What do I mean? You have individuals in the course of our investigations that we ask questions. Peradventure, you are aware of the crisis involved, of the problems involved in embarking on this journey. Would you have been interested in it? They said, yes, of course. Yes, of course. Because when they compare the risk and with what they are experiencing, when I mention experiences, at least in terms of an economic engagement, like our investigation has been able to reveal that smuggling of migrants in the country, there's just only one basic underlying determinant, and that's economic determinant. Most of Nigerians, especially the youthful population, they don't see the country offering them what they require, especially at the level of economic participation. So at this level, they are just out to take the risk.
I think we need to bring in Claire back into the conversation. Well, Claire, if you're there, let's discuss issues around the routes, which is largely used for smuggling, land, sea, air. And perhaps you can also talk to us about which of these channels of transportation has more numbers.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's quite difficult to determine because there are very different ways of recording smuggling, whether it's by land, sea, or air, as you rightly say. So for this research, we didn't focus on airports, which is where you would gain a better understanding of how much smuggling is taking place by air. We do know that smuggling by air usually involves document fraud, right? So people are smuggled because they're provided with a false or counterfeit passport or somebody else's passport, and therefore document fraud is involved. It's more expensive, basically, to put it simply, to be smuggled by air, right? It's safer, it's quicker, but it is out of the reach of a lot of people who wish to migrate. Therefore, we see large numbers of people traveling by land through West and North Africa, also to a certain extent through Central Africa and towards Southern Africa. And we know, of course, that in recent years, people have been smuggled by sea, particularly across the Mediterranean Sea to Northern Europe. The interesting finding we have specifically on smuggling by sea of Nigerians is that this has dramatically increased. So the high point was probably around 2016, 2017, when, over 30,000 Nigerians were smuggled by sea across the Mediterranean in these extremely dangerous conditions. Right now, if we look at 2021 and 2022, as far as we are in this year so far, we have just about 5,000 in total. So there's been a significant decrease there in smuggling by sea. What we also see, I mentioned that, smuggling by air is more expensive. It's sort of out of the reach of a lot of people. Smuggling by land through West Africa is very interesting in the sense that actually, as ECOWAS citizens, because of free movement, if Nigerians have a valid passport and if they cross at a regular border crossing within West Africa, within the ECOWAS region, for example, to Niger Republic, to Benin Republic, etc., then this is perfectly regular. There's no smuggling involved. The problem is that people will cross without a passport. Maybe they don't know they need a passport. Maybe they haven't been able to obtain one. Or they'll cross at an unofficial border crossing, so at a footpath somewhere where there isn't an official border. And then if they're assisted by someone in this who charges a fee, then that person is a smuggler and that migrant has been smuggled. So smuggling by land is very particular in the sense that it's possible to do it regularly without a smuggler. But what we found through the research was that because of issues with corruption, with people asking for bribes, and also issues with insecurity, a lot of Nigerians felt that it was safer and that it was even cheaper to use a smuggler rather than to go independently, because they felt they would be asked for higher bribes if they went independently. The smuggler then, with a group of migrants, will negotiate a lower bribe. So we see a really important driver here as being corruption and insecurity.
Right. Now, speaking about cost, Claire, still staying with you, you mentioned the fact that it's more expensive to go by air. What is the average cost that you found out in your research with regards to this matter?
Yeah, so it's a really important aspect, because to understand smuggling of migrants, we also need to understand the financial flows taking place. So we found that among the people we surveyed Nigerians in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Tunisia, and Libya. And overall, they were paying about $610 US for the journey. Now, that's the journey within West and North Africa. There's a separate fee to be paid if people are crossing the Mediterranean to Europe. So that would be in addition and is usually higher. And as I mentioned, for smuggling by air, the fees are likely to be much higher. So these are the kind of sums that we're talking about. The way that it functions is that people will contact the local agent of the smuggling network in their state of origin. They will then organize to pay that person. So this approximately $600 will be paid to a local agent in the state of origin in Nigeria. And then that person will give them the phone number of another person further along the route, maybe even just in Kano. And there in Kano, they'll contact that person and get the number of another person. And so this is the modus operandi of migrant smuggling generally from Nigeria. A local agent is paid, and in return, there's access to a network of contacts that will help the person then get to their final destination.
All right, we need to quickly go on a commercial break. When we return, we'll continue with this conversation. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We've been looking at migrant smuggling, and we have our guests, Coordinator, United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime Observatory on Smuggling of Migrants, Claire Haley, who joins us via Zoom, and National Research Consultant with the UNODC, Dr. Adebosi Adeniran, still with us here in the studio. I come to you now, Dr. Adeniran. We've seen how expensive or the cost for smuggling, but then again, you mentioned something about the fact that most of the persons that were profiled for this report talked about the economic situation in the country, not being able to provide something that they feel for their future, perhaps something positive for their future. How do we strike a balance? If we say we want to curtail the process of people moving out of the country, and yet again, the situation in the country is not conducive for them. It's kind of a dire situation.
Thank you for that question. Let me start by clarifying that no one is stopping people from leaving Nigeria, but the argument is that if you need to move, you move regularly. You move within the ambit of the laws of the country of origin and also of country of destination. But where smuggling of migrants comes in is that it has been detected that a significant proportion of cross-border movement and transcontinental movement emanating from Nigeria has been within the framework of smuggling and trafficking. So most of the respondents are finding economic justification for their desire to leave the country at all costs. I quickly call attention to a fact. We see the current inflation rate in the country so alarming, 20.25%. It's alarming. For our investigation, it has been a formidable framework for constructing and justifying this process.
All right. So it's making the business for smugglers thrive.
Oh, both sides. Smugglers and the people patronizing them. The market is booming because of that reason, because of inflation in the country.
Are we likely to see more numbers? Because the report covers
Thank
2019 to 2021.
Thank you.
So since we are feeling the brunt even more now.
I appreciate you for that question. That is where the problem lies. When we project the situation, it looks gloomy. It looks dangerous because there's no respite in the offing for now. And like the observatory we have launched last week, it's a repository whereby data will be updated from time to time. But we are talking about the situation as of 2021. Whereas when you pick the inflation rate as of 2021, it was relatively better than what we have at 20.85% now. And when you take the unemployment rate in the country, it has consistently been at 33.3% for the unemployment rate in our country. All of these things in combination, it is making the business of smuggling of migrants to be a booming one. And when you look at the situation as of 2021, when we have found that all of these indicators were performing better in previous year. So what we could project with the current situation, when you pick, for instance, the university students, since February 14th of this year,
7 months now.
they have been at home, and I can conveniently confirm to you that I've gotten students who are in their final years that have found that they are not going back to school. And most of them, they have entered this trend. That's where the danger lies. They have even forgotten things about the school.
So those are the implications. If you could just mention
Thank you very
more.
much. So when you pick this together, when you marry them together, like the case with ASU, you marry it with the economic situation, the expanding inflationary rate, you put it with what we call purchasing power parity in the country, which is performing poorly relative to other locations. All of this is together is not making this problem to be something we can overcome quickly.
Right. Right. So let's just quickly bring Claire into the mix. Kelly. Claire, so how much of a difference would this report make, looking at the picture Dr. Adeniro has painted? What will this report do to change the dynamics?
Yeah, so as Dr. Adeniro also said, we're not saying, it's not that people shouldn't consider migrating. I think that's really important to keep in mind. The point is that it's important both for general security and preventing crime, but also for a person's own safety and security to try to find ways to migrate legally and regularly and in accordance with the system. So the advantage, of course, in the West Africa region and for Nigerians is that you can move regularly within West Africa, provided you have a passport, provided you cross at a regular border crossing. And when we launched last week, we launched the research at the Nigeria Immigration Service headquarters with our partners, the Nigeria Immigration Service. And they're also trying to put out this message very strongly. They kicked off a sensitization campaign to prevent migrant smuggling and promote regular migration. So I think in this case, around the world, when we look at migration, and I've studied migration for decades now, it's always going to happen. There'll always be situations. I'm a migrant myself, where you move to a different country in search of greener pastures, of better opportunities. The important thing is to do that safely and do it legally, you know. So that's what we're trying to, that's what NIS is trying to promote, and that's what we're trying to look at as an alternative. UNODC has been calling for more opportunities to migrate regularly, for legal pathways, for migrants and refugees to be able to travel legally and safely. In order, you know, it's the best way to reduce migrant smuggling. Migrant smuggling only takes place if people feel like they have no alternative and, you know, they have to travel irregularly. So it's important both for Nigerians to be aware there are opportunities for regular and legal migration and to make sure they take advantage of them. But it's also important for governments around the world to make sure that these legal channels are available, to make sure there is an opportunity.
Yes,
a concerning finding we had also was that lots of Nigerians and other West Africans tried to migrate regularly, tried to get a visa, and it wasn't possible.
Hilly, because we need to get in a few more questions. So I'm sure issues around smuggling is not a Nigerian thing. In fact, in Mexico as well, the U.S. have had to battle these issues with the Mexican government over the years. Former U.S. President Donald Trump was loved by many, criticized by many, hated by many. He had promised to build a wall. Is that what we should be considering now? Should we build a wall?
So a number of countries around the world have, you know, attempted different approaches in order to reduce irregular migration and to combat migrant smuggling. As you rightly say, it's not an issue that just affects Nigeria. We are conducting research around the world in different countries, looking at what are the best ways to prevent migrant smuggling, to prosecute the offenders, and to protect the human rights of people who are smuggled. Because it's really important to remember that, you know, the international law calls for the criminalization of smugglers, but not of the people who are smuggled. They're not considered to be criminals. In some cases, in fact, if the smugglers abuse them or violate their human rights, they're actually considered victims. So that's really important. We have had different countries around the world trying different approaches. It's not only, you know, there's been construction of walls and fences in different countries. In the Sahara, you have the construction of sand berms, of different types of attempts to prevent this. What we call for at the UNODC is for governments to work together to find a better solution. As we say, it's not about preventing people from moving. It's about making sure that people can move safely and regularly and find economic opportunities in different countries. This has been happening throughout history and, you know, is beneficial to all the countries involved.
Right. We must thank you, Claire Haley, for your time on the program. But quickly before we let you go, Dr. Adinero, she talked about, you know, countries coming up with ways to addressing these matters, but she also mentioned something critical, which has to do with prosecution. I wonder how far we have come with that, and if that will also serve as a deterrent in any way.
Yeah, thank you very much. When it comes to prosecution issue, this is one of the purposes for creating this observatory. It's an open access and repository where government institutions can actually access information on how to mitigate the crisis, on how to handle the crisis, and when it comes to prosecution, also relevant information that could assist at that level. So for now, because of the modus operandi of this smuggling network, I have to let you know that it has been very, very, very difficult to have sufficient evidence to prosecute smugglers in this country. Because oftentimes, those people we refer to as smugglers, they act in most situations via proxy. You may never even know the facilitator or the drivers of the network of the smuggling unit, but those people you see, they're actually common people that they use for one purpose or the other. That is what we refer to as a fluidity of the entire process.
All right. We must leave the conversation here now, but we thank you for the work you are doing. National Research Consultant with the UNODC, Dr. Adebusuyi Adinero, as well as Claire Haley for your time on the program as well. Thank you for coming.